Hello and welcome to today's webinar. So we're going to look at the resource evaluation tool today. Before we get started on that, what I'd really like to do is acknowledge country before we get into that. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the custodians of the lands on footprints of the University of Newcastle. So the Awabakal Nation, Darrinjung Nation, Biripi, Worimi Nations, Warrawoona and Eora Nations. I acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging and the knowledge they share. So before we actually have a look at some examples, I'd like to go through and explain a little bit about the background behind the tool and why we put it together in the first place. So why did we? Very good question. There was a group of us who were interested in helping to explain how you might look at some resources and how you then might look at their quality, because now that there's so much more available on the web, and there's also a lot of content that could be used for assignments, but is it appropriate and is the quality there? Please always check with your lecturer before using anything, things such as social media, webinars, news, podcasts, those sorts of things, news items, to make sure it is appropriate for your assessment task. With a lot of those information sources available online, it's variable quality. There's the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So how do we weed out the good, the bad, and just keep the nice stuff, but get rid of the rest of it? So we need a systematic way to actually pull a lot of that stuff together. And so the idea behind the tool is to actually provide you with some suggestions about how you might go about doing that. So talking about that sort of stuff, I'm just going to share my screen and we'll have a look at the tool itself. Okay, so on the library website, where do I find this WACD tool that we're talking about this morning? Okay, so if I come down to the Learn screen in the middle of the library webpage, I then hit Resource Evaluation Tool, and that's where we find it. And so this is what we call our landing page, and this is what we're going to have a look at today. So before we get started and work through some examples, which Michael's going to help me do, I want to ask the million-dollar question is, what is resource evaluation? And please, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them into the chat and we'll stop at some points and ask if there are any, and we can answer them as we go. So basically, what is resource evaluation? Why do we need to evaluate it, and when should we evaluate it? So basically, as I've indicated, in terms of resource evaluation, it's looking at objectively at a resource to determine its quality and whether we should actually include it in an assessment task. So in terms of, that's basically what we're looking to do. So when should we do it? Basically, it's anytime you use something. So whether it be a journal article, a piece of news, anything like that, you should evaluate anything that you use in some form or another. Okay, so how do we go about using the tool? Nice explanation here. And we'll go through a lot of these steps with the examples that we'll go through in a minute. Just before I do that, what I'd like to do is talk about the two methods that we've actually included in the tool that we feel best is a way to actually help you work your way through this evaluating resources. The first one is a traditional method that you probably heard about called the trap option. So what we're looking about here is a lot of the usual stuff. So how timely is it? Its relevance to your assessment task, the authority, accuracy, and purpose. So it's suggesting that for books and journals, that would be the method that you would consider using, because often, certainly with journals, you can use the peer-reviewed option to help weed out some of the quality of stuff to start with. But what about all that stuff online? Well, what we're suggesting for that is what we call the SIFT method. And we'll run through a couple of examples of different sources using this particular method in a little bit. So basically, when looking at the SIFT method, we're looking at stop. Basically, that means don't read too far. You may only read the headline, or that might be as far as you go. You might check out who the authors are, what website it's come from, that sort of thing, but you wouldn't go too much further. You want to then investigate the source. So what is that source that has been provided and what's it doing? Then you want to find some other information. So you want to sort of basically find out whether it's basically the only thing that's ever saying anything about this sort of thing, or whether there's other types of information out there. And then finally, you want to trace the claims in that original source to see where they go back to. Are they credible? Are they not? So the big thing to do when you're using the resource here is to match the tool. If I come back to the front page here, is with what your information source is. See if you can best match it to what the options are on the front page here. It may not be a perfect match, but what we've tried to do here is pick a range of examples of content that you may think about using in terms of for your assessment task. And also keep in mind that what may end up happening is once you go through and start to really pull things apart and investigate a little bit more deeply, is that it may just become an idea or a starting point, and you may not end up actually using that particular source of information. You may end up using other types of more credible stuff or something with a little bit more detail, but it's a starting point. So please don't necessarily disregard or discard anything. Alrighty, so just before we get started on the examples, are there any questions so far?
Nothing in the chat just yet, Nicole.
Fabulous. Alrighty, so I'd like to bring Michael in at this stage. Michael is going to help me work through some examples. So we've got a couple of items that we're going to have a look through and work through today. So the first one that we've found is a lovely conversation article here. So I scroll up just a little bit further to give you a little bit more detail about what it is. So Michael, if I go back to the home page, having had a bit of a look at the article that we're looking at here, where do you think this one might fit for us in terms of what we might look at to as a bit of a starting point with the pages and that sort of thing?
Yep. Just firstly, Nicole, I've just put a link to this article in the chat if anyone would like to go and have a look at it as well.
Yep, they're welcome to do so.
Yep. So it does look, just looking at it now, it looks a bit like an article, but it's not a journal article. It's not from a journal, an academic journal. So I think I would place it in the websites or news media section.
Yeah. And that's where I would also think about doing that. Before we actually get in and have a good look at the conversation article that we've got there, what I wanted to do is just explain a bit about the page, what's actually on the pages. So down the left-hand side is an explanation of the process that we're talking about using for this particular thing. And with not so much the first one, but a lot of the others have some very short videos outlining how you go about undertaking each of the steps. Below that is a checklist that you're welcome to download, some other useful resources of which we will go and have a look at some of those as part of this. A bit of an idea about where to look for what on that particular example there. And then if I scroll back up to the top, if you want to have a bit of a go yourself, then please, the test yourself gives you the chance to work your own way through an article or an item that we've selected for you to have a look at. At the top, we've explained what some of the different terminology means because there can be a little bit of variations. And probably one of the most important and interesting facts on all of the pages is what we've called our red flag areas. So basically, you can have a look at these, and it's, have you found a resource that contains any of the following? Be wary and investigate carefully. Does it deserve to be used? So please remember, for any of this sort of information, it's going to help you with your assignment. So basically, you're auditioning it to see whether it's good enough, not the other way around. So please don't be swayed by things. Do your homework, do your due diligence to start with. So for example, if I just show you the front page, the reverse page of the blogs. So some of the concerns with blogs can be, it can be someone's opinion or an issue. It may not contain any references. Their credibility over time, because there is so many of them, has declined. And there also can be broken links and the use of emotive or biased headlines. So please, while they might be a good information source, them themselves may not be totally credible. Okay, Michael, so our first step, if I come back up to the top here, is investigate the source. So if I come back to our conversation article here, what would you investigate first? Any thoughts?
I'd like to know a little bit more about who the conversation are and what type of website this is.
Okay, terrific. Any ideas how you might go about doing that?
You could look for some about information on the actual website, or just pop it in Google, see if you can find any information about that website. Might be a good place to start.
Yep, and one of the concerns you can have by looking at, say, the conversation website itself is it's talking about itself. There's potential risk of bias. So while people may malign Wikipedia, this is a time when Wikipedia might actually really help us out. Okay, so all I've done here to help answer that question that I asked Michael was add Wikipedia to the conversation, which is the title of the publication or the site that we're looking at here. Due to copyright, I can't go any further, but what I can tell you here is that basically the conversations are not-for-profit media outlet publishing news stories and news and research reports online. The big thing to note about the conversation from reading the Wikipedia page and also from reading a little bit more on their website is that you have to be an academic, so you have to work for a university or CSIRO to be able to publish on the conversation. And they go through a pretty rigorous review process before anything is put up on the website. So given that, does that sound pretty good? Like we got something of a reasonable quality to start with? We'll need to do some more investigating.
Yeah, so far so good.
Yep, fabulous. Okay, anything else that we want to have a look at, investigate here while we're going?
Would we have a look at the author of the article as well?
I would, most definitely, because we want to make sure that Hannah actually works for the University of Newcastle, because that, just to check, it's just good habit. I mean, while this one may well, yep. So let's have a look here. It doesn't always mean that the author listed on an article will work for the organisation that they claim to, so it never hurts just to check. Again, can't go too much further, but as you can see, there's the University of Newcastle website. Under the profile, and it comes up with Associate Professor Hannah Powell. The other thing too, the other nice thing here is there's a photograph, and if we come back to the conversation article, there's a photo of Hannah as well, and it looks like it matches. So tick the box there for those two items. Okay, anything else that we'd have a look at?
In terms of investigating the source?
Yes, yep.
I can't think of anything, Nicole. Is there anything else we should be looking at?
Just wondering about like how it's written. I mean, we've said it's academics and those sorts of things. Is there any risk of bias or anything like that? I'm just thinking we're using this one on this time, but if we're using a different news source, could bias become an issue with the way things are written for some media outlets?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely bias on different media outlets would be something we could look up. I can see you've already typed it in, but yeah, maybe seeing if there's any evaluation on the bias of the conversation as a website. Lovely.
Yep. And so the media bias fact check website is the one that will actually do that for us. So I won't go any further because of due to copyright, but basically what I can do here is go through and put the conversation into that and then find out what they do in terms of how they rate. So they look at things like whether it's left-leaning or right-leaning, whether they use facts, whether they tend to use emotional language, a lot of that sort of stuff in the actual articles. So all you need to do is scroll down a little bit and you can answer some of those questions. And the conversation comes out as being pretty well balanced without a lot of bias occurring in that particular format.
Wow, that's an amazing resource. What type of media organizations would have information on there?
Pretty well just about anything. I've also tried some of the newspapers. So things like the Sydney Morning Herald, the ABC comes up on it as well. So my comment would be try and see before you sort of, yeah, you got to be, as I say, you got to be in it to win it. So no harm in asking the website whether they've got any information on a particular organisation to see what's in there.
Great. I'll put a link to that in the chat as well.
Fabulous. And there's also a link on the websites page as well. If I scroll down just a bit underneath the methodology here, you've actually got a link directly through to the website on the actual tool.
Great.
Alrighty, so we've got to that point. So in terms of looking at the source, I think we've ticked most of the boxes and we could come up with a conclusion about so far its credibility in terms of the resource. The next thing that we'd like to have a look at is looking for finding some other resources. So this is where we might need to have just a little bit of a read of the article. I wouldn't read too much, but basically what we're looking at here is different types of Australian beaches is what it comes down to, and I've had a quick glance to about this point. Okay, so in terms of finding other resources, Michael, any thoughts about where we might go to from there to have a look for other stuff that we might use for our assignment?
Yeah, the first place I go is the university library. So looking for, you've already clicked on it, but I'd be trying to find, I think, peer-reviewed articles, academic sources, that try and back up that information.
Yep. Completely biased, but yes, most definitely in this case. So I would do that. And the easiest way I tend to find, I mean, yes, you can use library search, but another way to do it is I'd have a look in the actual resource subject guides and that sort of thing, because there's a lot of databases here and it can make it maybe a little bit easier for some. So looking at beaches is an environmental issue in terms of thinking about what we've got access to here. So if I come in and have a look at environmental and life sciences, this gives me a whole heap of different articles and different databases. Basically, I can find some articles in. So let's keep it nice and broad and have a look at Environment Complete. So any idea about what we might search for here, Michael? Any thoughts about search terms? We can keep it broad. We haven't got to be too specific. We can use the filters to get further, but any thoughts about search terms?
Yeah, we want to find information about beach types or I don't know if it's beach categorization, or I'm not sure how that would be.
No, that's okay. We'll try
about in the
we'll try beach types. Yep. That's okay. I know from doing a little bit of a search before that we should get something, certainly with beaches. Okay, so just having a look here, it's picked it up. Because I put it into quotation marks, it's picking it up as a phrase rather than individual words. Alrighty, as we've only got 55, I won't bother going too much further and looking for something else. But one thing I'd suggest that we have a look at here before we look too much at the articles themselves is have a look at the filters down the side here. One of our given the list that we've just got on the screen here on the left-hand side, Michael, what's one of the most powerful things that we can do to get rid of some of the unwanted stuff on this particular, using these filters to get rid of some of the stuff that may not be totally credible?
Yeah, peer review, definitely I would click that, get it down to that credible scholarly journal articles.
I got rid of one, so that's okay. Yes, but that's okay. That's still good. You're not going to pick up the one that's likely to be a problem. Another thing we might have a look at is, and something to think about, is how old some of these are. So let's bring it up to 2010. We can always come back. We haven't got that many articles here, so we don't need to, unlike some, we don't necessarily need to be wheedling out too much. Another thing we might like to have a look at here is, I'll have a look under subject to start with and flick it out into the middle and see what else that we've got. So here might the coastal changes might be interesting because we've actually got quite a few of those. But as we've only got 55 articles, I'm thinking we might just leave it and just have a bit more of a look and maybe use geography as a filter rather than narrowing it down on some of the subject terms. So let's just see under here, and we've got 4 articles out of Australia. So let's pick that because we're interested in the Australian context here. Alrighty. So this gives us a little bit of something to look at in terms of some articles here. Topics. So, and the changing of beaches, as we've often seen, certainly in the news in the last little while, is a major issue. Another thing that we might have a look at here, if I just click on this one, just picking one at random here, is having a look at some of the other terms that have been used. which might then help us in terms of some of our other search terms we might like to have a look at for some more information if we need them. Shorelines is something else that I guess I hadn't thought of that could actually be quite important.
Yeah, and there was another result there that was about coastal morphology. Terms like that, I think.
Yes.
They sound a bit more scientific than beach types. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got that. But the thing is, there's no harm in going fishing. You could always put that in as another option in terms of to do a search. Alrighty, so what I'd suggest that you do in terms of that is have a look through a couple of databases. I've just happened to pick one at the moment just to have a bit of a look to show you that there's more information out there. Fabulous. Alrighty, so the last thing in terms of the SIF process that we need to do is come back and trace the claims in the article. So with the conversation article, Michael, do you know how they kind of reference their stuff? Reference in, I guess, a fairly broad or loose form in this particular situation?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a few links through the article. So often that will be so if you go follow the link, it will have all of the information backing up the claims.
Perfect. And the thing is though with these, so in terms of that, we need to do a couple of things. One, click on the links, but due to copyright, I can't go too much further here. So this first one, I guess, is more background information. It doesn't actually provide a lot more detail than potentially what's in the article. But the second link here is actually a journal article that Hannah has linked to.
Right.
And it's a journal article from the Journal of Coastal Research. And it's by a guy called Andrew D. Short, who works for the University of Sydney. The one question, and it was published in 2006. So there's a question, I guess, straight up about date. So again, what we might need to do, or what we should do, is actually check out to make sure. So if I just have a look for Andrew D. Short, and I'd also put here, because that's a fairly common, he doesn't have a unique surname. I like ones with unique surnames because it makes them a little bit more, you're guaranteed to find exactly the right person. Being told on the journal article, at that point in time, he worked for the Uni of Sydney. So let's just see what we can find, whether he still works for the Uni of Sydney. Awesome. So he does. Yep. So that's the person side of things, again, showing how we might look at validating that article, because we could also then use the trap process here to look a little bit more at the quality of that particular journal article. How else, Michael, might we check out the journal to see whether it's peer reviewed, because we're not searching in a database here. We've actually got just the journal article itself. Any thoughts about that one?
Just a question first, sorry, Nicole. So yep. Once you trace a source, would you then go back to the evaluation tool and do the evaluation process on that that source that you've traced as well?
Yes, I would, because you want to make sure that they're using credible stuff.
Right.
So
you could go back to the journal articles section of the tool and then evaluate it as a journal article.
Yes, and I get that's great. Partly what we've started to do. The beauty about a database is you can click the peer review ticket straight away, so they can get rid of some of those kind of things, and then you can bring the years up, so you get rid of some of the older stuff. With a link like this, you've just got the article, so you don't have any. There's no kind of assistance through the database to evaluate how good it is. So this is where a situation where you're going to have to ask yourself a few more questions. Is my thought here, just to make sure that it got good stuff.
So your question about checking if it's peer reviewed, you could go to the journal's homepage, or you could check on Ulrich's web. Will tell you if it's peer reviewed too. Okay,
so let's have a go at finding Ulrich's web. Just thinking that that'll be a little bit easier from a perspective. So because we know that the database by its name being Ulrich's, I go this way in through the databases, and here. And then all I need to do when Sweetie catches up with the world is put in the title of the journal, which is Journal of Coastal Research, and click here. Okay, So would you like to explain, Michael, as to whether this one happens to be peer reviewed?
Yep, sure. Just getting rid of the chat so I can see. So yeah, it looks like the top one. It does have an ISS number there, if you like a serial number, if you do need to check it. What you're looking for peer reviewed though is the referee's jersey, which can be hard to sort of identify from that little icon, but that is a referee's journey that signals that it will be a peer reviewed journal.
So terrific. We've probably at least ticked some of the basics with in relation to that article. The only flag that raises with me is the age of it. But then given the topic of it, beaches, I mean, they do change, yes, but there's always likely to be a beach there in some form or another. So maybe, again, you need to make a decision as to whether you use it, but a few things to think about in relation to that. So the question I've got, the final question I've got in relation to this conversation article, if I come back to it, would we consider using that for an assessment task? Does it tick a lot of the boxes so far?
Yes, I think so.
Yep.
We've got a credible website that it's coming from. The author is very credible as an associate professor. The information that they've used to base their article on looks good as well. I would only just sort of think about whether my assignment required specific types of resources. Like there might be some assignments where you would only use peer-reviewed journal articles, but I would trust the information in this article. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Okay, so are there any questions in the chat before we move on to another a different example?
No, nothing just yet.
Fabulous. No,
Feel free
okay.
to pop questions into the chat as we go along, everyone.
Terrific. Okay, so the other example I'd like to help or get Michael to help me work through is this one, which is actually off the Australia Institute website, and both of these items have been used with permission. So it was part of their summer series, and it was called Protecting Australian Content in the Age of Netflix. This happens to be a webinar or a podcast type thing. There's no visuals with this, it's purely voice. So just to get you a little bit of context before we go too much further, basically, it's about talking about Australian content requirements on television. So they've got to have so many hours of Australian content, but not the same requirements are not actually the case for streaming services. Very interestingly, when you first start listening to the podcast, you'll see that, or you'll hear that there's a disclaimer at the start about the nature of the topic and things could change because of legislation or other things that could happen. And one of the biggest challenges in the Australian market is that we can have, it's very easy for people, the streaming services to substitute content because the dominant language here in terms of what we're known for is English. So there's a lot of cheap substitution options and there's a lot of competition for airspace and time. Okay, so if I come back to our tool on the website here and come back up to the top. So we've got kind of seen what the example is this time, Michael. Any thoughts about where we might have a bit of a look for this particular one?
Yes, well, that's a podcast, so that one's an easy one. Straight into webinars and podcasts, I would go.
Fabulous. Alrighty, so basically the difference between the two is a webinar often you see visuals. It might just be a person, similar to what we're doing today. A podcast tends to be just voices, and there's that challenge about making things exciting with a podcast and that sort of thing too. Both of them can be, I guess, fact, or they can be stories in terms of like fictional type stories. It very much depends on things. But so we'll work out today whether what we've got here is where that sort of sits. Alrighty, so in terms of coming back to here, so I have mentioned who it's from. But how else might we find out, Michael, about who actually is part of the organisation, and also who's involved with the webinar? How might we work that out?
Yeah, so we want to know who sort of publishes or produces that webinar series, or the podcast series, I should say.
Yep, so if down the bottom here, it says at the Australia Institute, it also says it as part of the website address here. So we'll have a look for them. The other question I'll ask, so that way then we'll go and have a look on Google and see what we can find, is who's actually involved. And the person who's like asking the questions is a lady by the name of Ebony Bennett. And the two people who are being interviewed and discussing the issue are Eric Thompson, who's they claim is an actor and producer, and then Matthew Dina, who's the CEO of Screen Producers Australia. So let's have another look on Google, and we'll start off with having a look at the Australia Institute, and I'll add Wikipedia again to that, because what we're looking to do is find out a bit more about the organisation with these. So one thing about these particular types of organisations is that they are what we call a think tank. So they can be interesting, and in terms of, I guess, their credibility and some of that sort of stuff. So any thoughts, Michael, about when you read the Wikipedia page, what sort of things might be interesting to have a look for to see if we can find out about the background of the organisation?
Yeah, so I'd want to know if they're sort of affiliated with any, I don't know, companies or political parties, or, you know, as the name of your podcast says, follow the money. Who's funding this think tank? That's what I'd be looking for. Yeah,
and totally agree with that, most definitely. So the Australia Institute is funded by philanthropic people and through donations, and they don't take any sort of political work. So they don't take money to do a political thing, I sort of work on political stuff, but they'll often have a look at policies and pull apart the details. So independently of any sort of funding, it's part of what they do. So from that side, it looks like that might be certainly a good starting point. Again, we may not decide to use the article. We might decide to just use it as a starting point to get some ideas. Okay, so the next one we want to have a bit of a look at is, who is Ebony Bennett? Okay, what we'd really like for is something that is not the organisation stuff. So if I just pick the first one, the thing is that that's not the Ebony Bennett that we're after. There is no choice but to come down and have a look at some of the other examples that are here. So looks like that's the best we're going to do. So she at least works for the Australia Institute, which is a good start. When we've got that, we've managed to pick that up. That's probably about as good as we're going to get in relation to finding out a bit more about Ebony. The other one was Eric Thompson, and might just put actor in because it's not, again, it's not that kind of unique name, and see what we get there. It's saying here just simply on the top that he's Scottish-born New Zealand Australian actor, and again the photo, we haven't got any photos to compare to, but that looks pretty good. What's on the podcast indicates that he's an actor, so that's a good start. We've actually got a match there. And who was the last one?
It was Matthew Dina.
Matthew Dina.
Yep.
Okay. Alrighty. So this, again, unfortunately, we can't get anything that's independent. It's all associated with something. So basically, Matthew Dina is the Chief Executive Officer of Screen Producers Australia. So I'd be asking the question here about who are Screen Producers Australia. Basically, they do a lot of advocacy work for television producers and that sort of thing, trying to make sure that there's, in terms of advocating for policy change, making sure that the environment to encourage investment is a positive one. So that all seems to kind of stack up, maybe, if that makes sense. What do you think, Matthew, we've got a few things there to have a look at.
Yeah, they seem like the type of people you'd have as guests on, good people to talk about, Australian content.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of the next thing is to find some more resources and that sort of thing that we could actually use. So any thoughts about where we might go to find some more information?
Yeah, the same as last time. Go to the library. That's where I'd start.
Terrific. And I'd have again, there's a lovely collection of resources under here. So if I click on, and then for this one, got communication, journalism, films, and media. And what I was looking at was this one. So in particular, what we're interested in here is local content rules, and in particular, it's local TV content rules, because we're interested in television. It's not so much the movie side of things at the moment. We're just looking at television.
Yeah.
So if I put that in, again, I put it into quotation marks so that when the database has a look for us, we'll actually get some, we'll actually get it as quotation marks. So I was just thinking that first article looks quite promising. The only thing is it's a little bit dated, but it's interesting. Even in 2003, things were seen to be an issue back then. So it's not a new one, if that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
So in terms of, again, what we'd have a look at the peer-reviewed content.
Yeah, definitely.
Which gets rid of a few. The other thing I'd probably put down to is bring it up into the 21st century might be a good start too. Doesn't matter about then, 2014 will be fine. And then have a look under subject terms and we'll see what we can find. Not so much. So here I'd probably have a look at geography, because that's something that we're in particular interested in. But looking at these, it doesn't look like there's much on the Australian front. So again, I'd probably have a look. But that top article, that's actually come out of the US. But again, here, there's a little bit more information here. The other thing, given the nature of this particular issue, I'd also quite simply have a look online as well. And if I come back to...
Yeah, you might be able to find some policies or anything from regulators.
Yep, so I stuck in a search earlier looking at Australian TV rules. So the idea being content. So there's some nice stuff under here that would probably be quite helpful in terms of filling out some of the detail and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The big thing to remember about the databases is they're often research articles. So someone's looked into something and researched heavily on that sort of thing, which you can do for a beach, but local content rules can be a little bit different, if that makes a bit of sense. So this is also worth a bit of a look to find out some stuff here to get some more background on things. Yeah. Okay, so that also, I guess, helps us answer a little bit of the question too about tracing the claims in terms of looking at traditional broadcasting rules. Another element that you might like to have a look at here too is current government policy and what's being proposed for change. That can also be something that's worth looking at. You're looking at, in particular, why it is so important is purely because of the money that's behind the industry. There's millions of dollars. We're talking millions of dollars here in terms of with these standards and that sort of thing. So just thinking about that, Michael, would that podcast be a potential something that you might consider either using or as a starting point for some research and idea for an assignment?
Yeah, obviously I'd like to listen to it first before I made a decision, But yeah, it sounds like a really good starting point for bringing up those current topics of
Yeah.
what might be happening in the media industry at the moment. Because you've got those people who are from those industry like Screen Australia and things like that. So you're getting that really up to date of what's happening in the sector. And they'd be trustworthy sources for that. Again, I think about using that in the assignment, but just depending on what the assignment was. But I would think that the information in there is credible.
Yeah. And you've made a very valid point. You really want to listen to, once you do, I do a few checks first before you listen to the whole thing, because this one's nearly an hour long. So there's no point in listening to an hour only to find that it wasn't the greatest source to start with. So I'd investigate it like what we've done so far to pick up some stuff, and then I'd sit down and actually make sure that you listen to the whole thing. Because one thing I did like about it is it was upfront that there was a disclaimer about the fact that things may change, and they actually tell you when it was originally recorded. While the date on this is December, it was actually recorded back in September last year. So again, there's that potential, and we're now into May in 2022. There's a good chance that things may have moved on again. Yeah. So just before we finish up, noting the time, it's sort of marching on. Always the way when you're having a little bit of fun. The one thing I just wanted to mention that is quite important to consider is today we've just talked about largely I guess like written resources and things like that. But one of the big things that can get people into a bit of a spot of bother are images and videos. So please come and have a look at this particular page. And under here at the bottom is how to do a reverse image search. So for example, if you have an article, and social media is certainly, I guess, one of those red flaggy type potentially issues where you can have a picture and then you might have a story underneath. Does a picture relate to the story? And how do you work out whether it is or whether it isn't? So please think about coming in here. If you don't know how to do a reverse image search of that picture to make sure it does actually relate to the story, then that's a really important tool to add to your toolkit. It's amazing how things get strung together that bear absolutely no relation, but the idea of the image is to capture your interest, but you want to make sure it's capturing the right thing. Alrighty, and the only other thing, and then I'll take any questions at the end if there are any, is to I guess talk about where you might be able to get some help. So please, if you've got any questions about this, you're always welcome to ask the library. And there are a few options in relation to that as to what you've got. You can always go back and have a look at the website itself. So have a bit of a look at the tool, have a look at some of the other examples that are provided there. They might help you out. The big thing too here is that you can book a librarian. It's not the library's job to help you, to give you the answer about a resource. We can help prod you with some questions, but in the long run, the decision to use something is yours. You're the one who ticks the originality box when you submit your assignments, not the library staff. So please just bear that in mind when you do ask us some questions, but happy to help you either find some stuff or prod you with some questions in relation to this particular thing. So you're welcome to use the Book a Librarian service, which provides you with 25-30 minutes with a librarian that you can talk your way through things if you're interested. And you're always welcome to ask a quick question in library chat if you would like to do so. So with that, I'd like to wrap it up there. Are there any questions from anyone today that's here?
No questions just yet, Nicole. Just some thanks. Very helpful.
That's okay. You're welcome.
Which is great. Thank you. Yeah, no other questions at this stage. Just while we're doing that, we do also have a poll. We'd just like to get some feedback about the webinar series and this session in particular. So I'll just launch that while we see if there's any questions.
It's anonymous, so we don't know who's answering, given that there's not a huge number of people here today. So feel free to provide us some feedback. We would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah. So I'll just let that run for a few minutes.
That's okay. like to say thank you for coming along today. I'm hoping that we've shown you some useful tips and tricks for your upcoming assessment tasks. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with the library. We've also got another webinar next week, which I think is looking at LinkedIn. So please, if you're interested, book in. It's at the same time next Tuesday at 10 a.m.
Yep, that was excellent. Thanks, Nicole.
And also I'd like to thank Michael for your help in working our way through the assignments, through the resources, rather than me just talking about them.
You're welcome, Nicole. No worries. Thanks for those responses. We got some responses in the poll too. Okay, thanks everyone. I think we'll wrap it up there.